I think Oliver's mic is muted.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Great, you are back.
I was saying that I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and also the different views and perspectives that are shared. One of the things that I want to outline from the very go is that different strands of our society have different views in what direction we need to take a constitutional reform project towards. And those views are all valid. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to refrain from speaking directly to whether or not I agree with substantive proposals because they have certain views, but from a position or from the point of view of a constitution maker, talk about some of the things that they have to look out for as we are going to bring this into the general body of public discourse and how we're going to discuss them. I'm going to mention 5 points that I think are critical to the conversation. Before I do that, I want to first acknowledge, I haven't heard mentioned, Ivio Dankwa, who led a Constitution Review Implementation Committee, which came right after the Constitution Review Commission, that they have done some work, particularly in terms of drafting the articles and providing a framework for implementing the recommendations. I know that KY Amwakun with Assets and I have worked tremendously and others as well towards this process, which has culminated in what the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs is housing. And I know that he has provided great leadership through the compact process and that are key partners of this journey. The 5 points I want to make, and I think that they need to account for, is 1, questions around internal consistency. And internal consistency of the proposals and also the reasoning behind them. So for instance, I hear a suggestion that is going to be sort of application of formula, for instance. The formula comes in terms of the choice of 25 ministers. So the thinking shouldn't just be about, well, we have 25, but what fed into the 25? And why did we settle on 25? Secondly, around Parliament, for instance, in terms of representation in Ghana and across the world, the number of MP to population, we have one of the lowest across the world. We have 102, roughly, if you take that population to be 31 million, so to round it off, we have about 112,000 people to 1 MP. It is one of the lowest in the entire world. I think India is around 400,000, the US is around 350,000 and others. The only one that surpasses us is maybe the UK with 650 ministers, which brings them to an average of 110,000. My thinking is that it is going to be formula that we don't just say, we have gone and say, well, we have 275, and so they're going to plan to create 2 new more, so let's cap it at 277. It doesn't demonstrate something that is well thought through. And I think that's some of the things that Mambi was talking about, that shouldn't be overrun by time. If we went from the approach and said that we want for every 250,000 Ghanaians to be represented by 1 MP, it will bring the current composition of Parliament down to 124. And we know that every time we gain we get 1 million Ghanaians, we gain 4 new MPs. In the popular mind, we have created some equity around the number of people that ought to be represented in our Parliament and who is speaking for them. That way, it's the factors of determining how we review the membership of Parliament that sustains for a longer period of time. So that in 25 years' time, when we have 500 million Ghanaians, or that something has changed around the composition of Ghana, the questions of representation are not answered by our constitution. It's kind of how I think about it. The question around formula for the Independent Emoluments Committee as their suggestion, the questions around equity of the Article 71 framework isn't responded to and answered by formula only. And I think that some of the questions around the fact that we have a Chief Justice who said they were sending text messages to people within the presidency to release funding that is to the judiciary, it's one of the things that fed into this idea of independence around emoluments generally. And those questions ought to be answered even if formula doesn't do it for you. The questions around the equity, I think Mami also mentioned about this idea of insulating a certain class of people from the economic realities of the society can create a dysfunction and can undermine faith in them. And so that if we have a process whereby we all are subject to single spine, everybody knows that we are all feeling the burn. And that is important in order to manage how society views those who lead them. So those are some of the questions of internal consistency I also want to address. Perhaps there's also one issue even around that on the proposals around the Judicial Committee of the National House of Chiefs. The proposal, as I understand it, is that you have to have a legal mind, a judge, who forms there. The proposal to have a retired judge of the Superior Court is one I have a problem with. The Constitution in its explanation says that persons who have reached a certain age cannot serve within the regular judiciary. Then we say that as old as they are, the Constitution determines that they should be retired. We should make them members of the Judicial Committee. We haven't achieved necessarily the objective of having legal minds. It can be persons who are nominated there, but who are also considered as part of the Superior Court and doesn't unlimited by their retirement. So the retirement limitation, I don't really fully understand. But again,
in America, they serve a life term.
The second point I want to make.
In America, they serve a life term, right?
Pardon?
In America, they serve a life term.
Yes. In America, they serve a life term. If you're proposing a life term, then it has to, again, internally consistent with the way we view it.
Okay.
Even in fact, on the internal consistency, I noticed that the cap ministers, the cap parliament, but say they are not going to propose a cap for the judiciary. In fact, they are recommending divisions of the Supreme Court to replicate the High Court. The High Court has 8 divisions. 8 divisions, if you have a panel of 5 per each, which the Supreme Court requires, that's a minimum of 40 members of the Supreme Court. Again, these are questions that you need to be able to continue to reason through because they're going to come up when it comes to the public. The second thing is the risk factors. When you cap ministers at 25, trust me, we are going to have, for each minister, 15 special advisors. You have to think through how do you tie the hands of the political class. You need to know the beast you're dealing with. If not, you'll be overrun by the way in which the system operates. And I understand that there's difficulties here because it's a committee that is working part-time. And they don't have a research team that is looking at what are the risk factors of every proposal. That is key before you send out a proposal, I think. Unless we can think around the framework of how we tie those in, we're going to create a problem in the long run. The other thing is around the president's appointing powers and we say ministers. Okay. One of the bigger challenges we have consistently is that if Chairman, for instance, is talking about the president appointing 6,000 people, which is a problem, the president's appointing of ministers of all these people does not evolve from the Constitution alone. There are less than 1,000 people appointed by the president directly under the Constitution. The vast majority, it is Parliament which is enlarging the powers of the president through these appointing mechanisms. You have to directly limit what Parliament does in expanding executive and appointing powers of the president. If you don't do that, we are going to move it from ministers and increase appointment on another end. The third thing is about procedure and methodology. So when you say, for instance, that you're going to do consultations, in order to build trust, the people need to be clear. Our consultations need to play within the framework of what you have chosen, or we can go beyond? And if our consultations change what you have recommended, what are you going to do about it? If you don't answer this question seriously, people are not going to trust that that consultative process is going to contribute to anything meaningful because you're coming to them with a mind made up. The third thing is about the process of prioritization of the issues. So I'm going to look at some of them. And when you remember, for instance, that the Constitution Review Commission made 478 recommendations. Not all of them were constitutional. 264 were constitutional. There's a sense of prioritization that is coming up here. That they're not going to be that expansive and holistic in the review. But the process by which you go and choose what you're giving priority to is important. I know, for instance, that one of the recommendations is that the quorum of Parliament ought to change. And instead of saying, apart from the person presiding, all members of Parliament should form, 1/3 should form the quorum. We should change that to our quorum should be 1/3 of all the members of Parliament. I think that because we are going to be focusing on prioritization, this issue has already been dealt with in Justice Abdul Line. There's no controversy around them. Focus the time then on the big ticket issues so that it doesn't look like you're doing peripheral changing of language and tweaking here and there, and that doesn't really get to the substance of what the broad society is asking for.
All right.
So that's the fourth one there. And the last one is about the political process. To engender trust in the process and what they're trying to do, people are going to be asking, like you have started, is this going to end up somewhere? We're going into election year. The election priorities would overrun, and it's likely to overrun recommendations and a political project of drawing people towards a referendum. And if after that, what happens? If you're going to tell the next government that reduce ministers to 25, it sounds like the situation where we've known in a political situation where people feel like proposals made in the final year where you have a lame duck president are intended to bind the executive.
Right.
The next executive. And that can be a process that undermines commitment of all the political actors in the process.
Right.
So those will be my 5 pointers.
Thank you very much. And